a woman scream.
What?
I'm serious. That's why we came up here like this, because then they talked to the caller. Whoever they were talking to said that there's a person dead.
Sometimes the biggest developments in a case don't come from arrests or charges. They come from who is suddenly willing or unwilling to talk.
Up? Is it because charges are on the horizon, or is it simply damage control for the 20-year-old musician?
For months, questions have surrounded the death of a 14-year-old girl whose body was found inside a Tesla in Los Angeles. Questions about how she got there, who knew what happened, and who may have helped keep the truth hidden. Now, a new name is back in focus. A man once described as a friend. Someone long rumored to know more than he's ever said. And someone law enforcement went to unusual lengths to bring back to California. According to new reporting, that man may have just testified behind closed doors, not in open court, but in front of a grand jury. If that's true, it changes everything. Grand juries don't exist for spectacle. They exist to build cases quietly, methodically, and often right before something much bigger happens. And when a potential key witness is arrested out of state, returned under a warrant, and then seen walking into a Los Angeles courthouse alongside the prosecutor handling the case, it raises one unavoidable question. What does he know? And why now? Because in investigations like this, testimony isn't just about answers, it's about pressure, leverage, and deciding who talks first, and who may soon be facing charges. What happened inside that courthouse may not be public yet, but if the reports are accurate, the silence surrounding this case may finally be breaking. And what comes next could determine whether justice for a 14-year-old girl is finally within reach, or slips further into the shadows. For months, the investigation into the death of 14-year-old Celeste Rivas Hernandez has moved in near silence. No arrests, no charges, just fragments of information leaking out slowly, leaving the public piecing together a story that feels incomplete and deeply unsettling. What is known is this. In September 2025, Celeste's body was discovered inside a Tesla in Los Angeles. The vehicle was reportedly registered to David, a singer whose name has since become inseparable from the case. Before that discovery, Celeste had been missing for months. During that time, questions swirled about where she was staying, who she was with, and how an underage girl could seemingly disappear into an adult world without immediate intervention. From the beginning, investigators made it clear this was not a simple case. There were layers, social connections, digital evidence, movement between locations, and a tight-knit group of adults whose relationships with Celeste remain under scrutiny. Among those names was Neo Langston. Langston has been described as an apparent friend of David, someone who existed within the same orbit, close enough to appear in photos and videos, close enough to raise eyebrows, but distant enough to avoid public attention. For a long time, he was more rumor than confirmed witness. That changed when he was arrested in Montana. Law enforcement didn't simply ask him to come in. They issued an out-of-state warrant. Langston was taken into custody at his mother's home and transferred back to Los Angeles. Officially, the arrest was for failure to appear as a witness. But even that phrasing triggered speculation. Failure to appear where? And to testify about what? At the time, there was no public confirmation that a grand jury was even active in this case. But legal observers noted something unusual. Targets of investigations are rarely compelled to testify. Witnesses are. That distinction matters. If Langston were considered a suspect or target, the expectation would be different. He would likely have legal counsel, invoke his Fifth Amendment rights, and avoid being placed under oath. Yet authorities went through the effort of locating him out of state and forcing his return. That suggested prosecutors believed he had information they needed. Now, new reporting has intensified that belief. According to TMZ, Langston was seen entering a Los Angeles courthouse, the same courthouse where a grand jury is reportedly hearing evidence related to Celeste's death. Reporters attempted to question him. He said nothing, not a word, no denial, no confirmation. Silence, in a case like this, speaks loudly. TMZ also reported seeing Deputy District Attorney Beth Silverman entering the same courthouse. Silverman is believed to be the prosecutor presenting evidence to the grand jury in this case. The timing alone raised serious questions. Coincidence is always possible, but patterns are harder to dismiss. This isn't the first time Silverman's name has surfaced alongside talk of uncooperative witnesses. Back in December, TMZ reported a conversation in a courthouse hallway between Silverman and an attorney representing Robert Morgan Roth, a figure connected to David's touring operation. That conversation allegedly involved discussion of a witness who was not cooperating. At the time, it was unclear who that witness might be. Now, many are asking whether that witness was Neo Langston. If so, his sudden appearance in court takes on a very different meaning. Another detail has drawn intense attention: the length of time Langston reportedly spent inside. According to TMZ, he was only in front of the grand jury for approximately 30 to 40 minutes. That is unusually brief. In serious cases, especially those involving a minor, a suspicious death, and potential homicide, key witnesses often testify for hours. There are documents to review, timelines to clarify, names to confirm. 30 to 40 minutes suggests something else may have happened. There are a few possibilities. One is that Langston provided limited but specific testimony, answering narrowly focused questions designed to lock in certain facts. Prosecutors sometimes do this to preserve testimony under oath, ensuring that a witness cannot later change their story. Another possibility is that he invoked his Fifth Amendment right against self-incrimination. If a witness repeatedly refuses to answer substantive questions, testimony can end quickly, unless prosecutors offer immunity. And if immunity were granted, experts say the testimony would likely have lasted much longer. Which raises the question, did Langston cooperate at all? Former prosecutors have weighed in, noting that Los Angeles rarely uses grand juries the way other jurisdictions do. Instead of charging first and holding a preliminary hearing, the DA's office appears to be using the grand jury as an investigative tool. Why? To lock in witnesses, to apply pressure, and to determine who might turn on whom. In cases involving inner circles, entourages, close friends, people who move together, cooperation rarely comes easily. Loyalty, fear, and self-preservation all collide. A grand jury allows prosecutors to quietly force those decisions, and that's why Langston's appearance matters. He wasn't brought back casually. He wasn't asked politely. He was arrested. Private investigator Steve Fisher, who has followed the case closely, previously said that targets are not usually compelled to testify. Witnesses are. That suggests Langston may not be the primary focus of charges, but someone prosecutors believe can help them get there. Fisher has also emphasized that this case may involve far more than a single crime. According to him, investigators should be looking not only at Celeste's death, but at potential sex crimes, trafficking, and facilitation. Who gave her rides? Who housed her? Who knew her age and did nothing? Those questions point toward more than one person, and that aligns with other claims made by defense attorneys and commentators, who suggest investigators may be looking at a second, unidentified individual involved before, during, and after Celeste's death. Cell phone data, social media activity, even data from the Tesla itself, may place another person in the same neighborhood during critical time periods. If that's true, Langston's testimony could be pivotal. Not because it answers everything, but because it might confirm who was present, who knew what, and who helped after the fact. And in a case this complex, those details are often what separates suspicion from charges. For now, nothing has been confirmed officially. No transcripts have been released. No statements have been made by prosecutors. But the movement is unmistakable. A witness arrested, a courthouse appearance, a grand jury quietly convening. After months of waiting, something is finally happening behind the scenes. And when cases like this start moving again, it usually means the investigation is nearing a crossroads, one that could change everything. The reason this development is drawing so much attention is not just who may have testified, it's how and why prosecutors appear to be moving the way they are. For a long time, one of the biggest mysteries in the Celeste Rivas Hernandez case has been the absence of charges. A 14-year-old girl disappears. Months later, her body is found inside a Tesla. And yet, no one is immediately arrested. No public suspects are named. The investigation moves quietly, almost cautiously. To many observers, that silence has been frustrating. To prosecutors, however, silence can be strategic. Behind the scenes, there are indications that this case has been unfolding slowly and deliberately, with investigators building something far larger than a single charge or a single defendant. And the reported use of a grand jury is one of the clearest signals of that approach. In Los Angeles, grand juries are not routine. Most criminal cases move forward through complaints and preliminary hearings. A grand jury is typically reserved for situations where prosecutors need secrecy, leverage, and control over witnesses. That makes its reported use here significant. A grand jury allows prosecutors to compel testimony without alerting potential suspects to what evidence exists. It also allows them to evaluate credibility, to see who is cooperative, who hesitates, and who may be protecting someone else. This is where Neo Langston re-enters the picture. Langston's arrest in Montana raised eyebrows because it was unusually aggressive for a simple failure to appear. Prosecutors did not wait for him to resurface. They went to another state, located him at his mother's home, and brought him back to Los Angeles under a warrant. That kind of effort is not expended lightly. Legal experts point out that prosecutors typically reserve that level of force for witnesses they believe are essential. Someone whose testimony could clarify timelines, confirm locations, or identify other people involved. And yet, there's an important distinction here. Essential does not always mean innocent. In complex cases, prosecutors often walk a fine line. A person can be deeply involved in events without being the primary offender. They may have helped after the fact. They may have facilitated access. Or they may simply know too much to remain silent. That grey area appears to be exactly where Langston may fall. When TMZ reporters spotted him entering the Los Angeles courthouse, they attempted to question him directly. He did not respond. He did not deny testifying. He did not confirm it either. Silence in this context is revealing. Even more revealing is the timing. Around the same time, Deputy District Attorney Beth Silverman was also seen entering the courthouse. Silverman is widely believed to be leading the presentation of evidence to the grand jury in this case. This was not a random courtroom appearance. If Langston was simply resolving a minor failure to appear issue, there would be no reason for the lead prosecutor on a potential homicide investigation to be present. That overlap has fueled the belief that Langston was brought in for a specific purpose, to testify under oath about what he knows. But what truly complicates the picture is the reported duration of his appearance. 30 to 40 minutes. For a case involving a missing minor, a suspicious death, and potential additional crimes, that is unusually short. It suggests one of three possibilities. First, prosecutors may have already known most of what they needed, and were simply confirming key points. This can include names, dates, locations, and relationships. In that scenario, Langston's role would be narrow but important, a witness used to corroborate existing evidence. Second, Langston may have invoked his Fifth Amendment right against self-incrimination. If a witness refuses to answer substantive questions, the testimony can end quickly unless immunity is offered. Third, Langston may have partially cooperated, answering some questions while declining others. Each possibility carries different implications. If he cooperated fully but briefly, prosecutors may already have a strong case and only needed him to lock down specific facts. If he invoked the Fifth, it suggests potential exposure, and raises questions about whether immunity may eventually be offered to compel cooperation. What experts agree on is this: if Langston were the primary target, he would almost certainly not be placed in front of a grand jury this way. Targets are rarely compelled to testify, because doing so risks giving them a platform to shape the narrative or create inconsistencies that can later be exploited by defense attorneys. Instead, prosecutors typically use grand juries to secure testimony against targets, not from them. That brings the focus back to David. While authorities have not publicly named him as a suspect, his connection to the Tesla, the timeline, and Celeste's disappearance have kept him central to the case. The question is no longer whether investigators are looking at him, but whether they now believe they have enough to move forward. Several analysts have suggested that prosecutors may be trying to determine whether Celeste's death involved only one person, or whether others assisted before, during, or after. That includes potential charges related to concealment of a body, facilitation, or crimes connected to her status as a minor. This is where witness testimony becomes crucial. Digital evidence can place people in locations. It can show messages, movement, and communication. But it cannot always explain intent or context. Witnesses can. They can explain who was present, who knew her age, who gave her rides, who allowed her to stay, and who may have helped cover up what happened afterward. Those details are often what separate circumstantial evidence from criminal liability, and that may explain why prosecutors are taking their time. This does not appear to be an investigation rushed toward headlines. It appears to be one built carefully, piece by piece, behind closed doors, which makes Langston's reported testimony such a critical moment. Whether he spoke freely, selectively, or not at all, his appearance suggests the case has reached a new phase, one where prosecutors are no longer just collecting evidence, but testing it, testing witnesses, testing narratives, and preparing for what comes next. Because once a grand jury begins hearing testimony like this, the next steps are rarely far behind. What makes this moment so critical is not just the possibility that testimony happened, it's what testimony at this stage is designed to accomplish. Grand juries are not about storytelling, they are about leverage. Prosecutors use them to test theories, pressure witnesses, and quietly determine whether a case is strong enough to survive the moment it becomes public. And when a case has remained uncharged for this long, every witness who enters that room carries weight far beyond their individual role. That is why the focus has now shifted from whether Neo Langston testified to what his testimony signals. Former prosecutors point out that grand jury proceedings are often used to lock witnesses into sworn statements before charges are filed. Once a witness testifies under oath, their words become a fixed reference point. If they later change their story, those inconsistencies can be used to challenge their credibility, or worse, expose them to perjury charges. In other words, the grand jury is not just gathering information, it is freezing it in place. This strategy becomes especially important in cases involving inner circles, groups of people who share loyalty, proximity, and mutual exposure. In those environments, silence is often a form of self-protection. No one wants to be the first to talk. No one wants to be blamed for breaking ranks. But pressure changes dynamics. An arrest for failure to appear, transport across state lines, the real possibility of jail time. Those factors force people to make decisions they may have avoided for months, cooperate, or risk becoming expendable. That's why Langston's brief time inside the courthouse has generated so much speculation. 30 to 40 minutes may not sound like much, but in a grand jury setting, even a short appearance can accomplish exactly what prosecutors need. They may not be seeking a full confession. They may not even be seeking new information. They may simply be confirming what they already know, and seeing how the witness reacts. Does he hesitate? Does he contradict digital evidence? Does he invoke his rights? Each response tells prosecutors something valuable. If Langston invoked his Fifth Amendment right repeatedly, that alone helps define his legal posture. It tells prosecutors he may have exposure, or believes he does. That opens the door to discussions about immunity, cooperation, or future charges. If he answered selectively, it suggests boundaries, lines he's willing to cross, and lines he won't. And if he answered cleanly and consistently, it strengthens whatever timeline prosecutors are constructing. Another key factor here is location. Los Angeles County prosecutors rarely default to grand juries. When they do, it's usually because secrecy matters. Complaints and preliminary hearings create public records. Grand juries do not. That secrecy protects investigations and shields witnesses from immediate retaliation or public scrutiny. In a case involving a public figure, a missing minor, and intense online attention, secrecy is not a luxury. It's a necessity. This may also explain why charges have not yet been filed. Contrary to popular belief, delays do not always signal weakness. Sometimes they signal caution. Prosecutors know that once charges are filed, the clock starts ticking. Defense teams gain access to evidence. Narratives harden. Mistakes become permanent. Waiting allows prosecutors to close gaps. And gaps still exist. While Celeste's body was found months ago, investigators have been careful about what they confirm publicly. Toxicology results, for example, have reportedly been sealed, a move that suggests sensitive information that could impact charging decisions. Digital evidence, too, is complex. Cell phone records, social media activity, vehicle data from the Tesla, all of it must be analyzed, authenticated, and contextualized. Technology can show movement, it can show communication, but it does not explain why something happened. That's where witnesses come in. Someone like Langston may not be able to explain everything, but he may be able to explain enough. Enough to place people together. Enough to confirm who had access to what. Enough to clarify who knew Celeste's age, and who ignored it. Those details matter, because this case may not hinge on a single charge. Investigators have repeatedly suggested that the scope could include more than homicide. Potential crimes discussed by analysts include facilitation, trafficking, unlawful sexual conduct with a minor, and concealment of a body. Each of those charges carries different evidentiary requirements, and each may involve different defendants. That is why grand jury testimony is so powerful at this stage. It allows prosecutors to explore multiple charging paths simultaneously, without committing publicly to any one of them. Another factor adding pressure is perception. This case has not faded from public consciousness. Viewers, commentators, and advocates continue to demand answers. Many have expressed frustration that a 14-year-old girl could be missing for months, found deceased, and still see no one held accountable. Prosecutors are aware of that frustration, but they are also aware of something else. A weak case filed too early can collapse everything, so instead of rushing, they appear to be tightening. Witness by witness, statement by statement, evidence by evidence. And that brings us back to why this moment matters. Langston's appearance suggests the investigation is no longer passive. It has moved from gathering to testing, from observation to action. Once prosecutors begin compelling testimony like this, the end game is no longer abstract. It becomes procedural. Who cooperates? Who resists? Who becomes indispensable? And who becomes expendable? Those determinations often precede charges by weeks, sometimes days. Nothing has been announced yet. No indictments have been returned publicly. No arrests have been made. But the machinery is clearly in motion. And in cases like this, once that machinery starts turning, it rarely stops without leaving something behind. As this investigation continues to unfold behind closed doors, one reality is becoming increasingly difficult to ignore. This case is no longer dormant. For months, the silence surrounding Celeste Rivas Hernandez's death created the impression of stagnation, as if the system had stalled or worse, moved on. But the recent developments suggest something very different. They suggest preparation, precision, and a deliberate effort to ensure that when the next step is taken, it cannot be undone. Grand jury proceedings are not designed for closure. They are designed for commitment. Once prosecutors begin compelling testimony, especially from individuals pulled back across state lines,